Welcome to the deep dive. Today,
But we're
uh,
strapping on our intellectual armor.
and jumping into the mind of Carl von Clausewitz. Specifically, we're diving into Book 6, Chapters 7 and 8 of his masterpiece, On War.
Now, we know you're no stranger to strategic thinking. You live it every day.
That's right. And while Clausewitz was writing back in the early 19th century, his work on attack and defense remains surprisingly relevant, even in today's world.
Absolutely. He's considered a giant in the field for a reason. So, for you listening in.
We're going to break down Clausewitz's ideas on defense, not just what they meant in his time, but how they still hold weight on the battlefields of today.
What's fascinating is that Clausewitz flips the script on how we usually think about warfare. He argues that it's not about who throws the first punch, but who dictates the terms of the fight.
It's about using defense to set the board, so to speak.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. So he's saying that defense is more than just reacting to an attack. It's about shaping the entire conflict from the very beginning.
Precisely. He argues that defense is actually the stronger form of warfare. Think about it.
Hmm.
The defender often gets to choose the battleground, dictate the timing.
And force the attacker to respond to their moves. It's about leveraging those advantages for strategic gain.
Okay, I'm starting to see where he's coming from. But what does that actually look like on the ground? Can you give us an example?
Absolutely. Let's take a look at the Battle of Kulm in 1757. Daun, the Austrian commander, understood the power of choosing his ground. He forced his opponent, Frederick the Great,
A renowned military genius.
to attack him on his terms.
Hold on, are you saying that a retreating army can sometimes be the one strategically winning?
Exactly. Daun's forces absorbed the brunt of Frederick's attack, and by choosing when and where to engage, inflicted heavy casualties. It was a decisive victory for Daun and a prime example of Clausewitz's principle of defense in action.
Wow, that's incredible. So how does this idea of defense as the stronger form of warfare translate to the modern battlefield?
It's all around us. Think about guerrilla warfare. It's a classic example of choosing when and where to strike, keeping a larger, more technologically advanced force off balance. It's about maximizing your own strengths while exploiting the enemy's weaknesses, even if those weaknesses are their supply lines or their dependence on technology.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about fortresses and trenches anymore. It's about utilizing any advantage you have, even if it seems like you're on the back foot. But what about a direct clash? Does Clausewitz talk about that?
Absolutely. He outlines two main solutions that stem from this foundation of defense: solution by the sword and solution by the attacker's exhaustion.
Okay, let's unpack those. What's the difference?
Well, think of solution by the sword as the more straightforward approach. It's about directly confronting and defeating the enemy in battle, similar to Frederick the Great's victory at Hohenfriedberg, where he actively engaged and overpowered the enemy.
So a decisive victory on the battlefield, meeting force with force. What about this idea of solution by the attacker's exhaustion? It sounds a little more roundabout.
That's a great way to put it. Think of it almost like economic warfare, but on the battlefield. Clausewitz uses Wellington at Torres Vedras in 1810 as a perfect example. Instead of engaging directly, Wellington chose his ground and waited. Massena's forces, meanwhile, were ravaged by hunger and disease. It was a war of attrition.
No.
Exactly. And eventually, Massena was forced to retreat, his forces depleted without a single decisive battle. This solution by exhaustion can be a very powerful tool, especially for a defender facing a larger or more aggressive force.
So it's about choosing your battles strategically, knowing when to hold back and let other factors work in your favor. It's a very different way of thinking about victory, that's for sure. But it sounds like it takes incredible discipline and an understanding of the bigger picture.
It absolutely does. And that's why Clausewitz stresses the importance of what he calls waiting for. It's not about being passive, but about actively observing, analyzing, and choosing the right moment to act.
It's about picking your shot, so to speak, not just reacting to the enemy, but making them react to you.
Yeah, exactly. It's about controlling the tempo of the conflict, forcing the enemy to play your game, even if it feels like they're the ones on the offensive.
So this waiting for, it's about more than just biding your time. It sounds like it's really at the heart of Clausewitz's entire philosophy of defense. He makes it sound like an art form almost. But how do you actually put that into practice?
Well, Clausewitz breaks down the concept of defense into four distinct stages, each building on the last and offering different opportunities for that decisive waiting for.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into these stages. What's the first one?
The first stage is the most straightforward. You're confronting the enemy head-on as soon as they cross into your territory. Think of it as a preemptive strike, a show of force. The goal is to halt their advance immediately and seize the initiative.
So strike fast, strike hard. It's about sending a message right from the start.
Exactly. Battles like Molomitz and Hohenfriedberg, where there's less emphasis on waiting and more on delivering a decisive blow early on, are good examples of this first stage in action.
Okay, so that's stage one. What about stage two? How is it different?
Stage 2 is about choosing your moment to strike. Even if it means giving up some ground initially, you're still confronting the enemy relatively close to the border, but you're letting them make the first move, lulling them into a false sense of security.
So there's a bit more waiting for involved here.
Absolutely. It's about choosing the time and place that maximizes your advantage. Battles like Zaslau, Sohr, Rosbach, these are all examples of this kind of calculated engagement.
Okay, so you're letting the enemy dictate the initial engagement, but you're already setting the stage for a countermove. What happens in stage three? Do you let the enemy in even further?
You got it. This is where we see that classic image of defense digging in, waiting for the enemy to come to you. The defender is deeply entrenched, like at the Battle of Binzelwitz, forcing the attacker to expend resources and morale trying to overcome their defenses.
It's the classic siege scenario, high stakes, but potentially a huge payoff if the defender can hold out.
Exactly. It can be incredibly effective, but it also hinges on having a strong defensive position and anticipating the enemy's willingness to risk a costly assault.
High risk, high reward. Okay, so if stage three is the classic siege, what does stage four look like?
This is where it gets really interesting, and arguably where we see Clausewitz's concept of waiting for taken to its most extreme. Stage 4 involves drawing the enemy deep into your territory.
Wait, really? That seems counterintuitive. Why on earth would you do that?
It's about playing the long game, understanding that sometimes strategic retreat is the best form of defense. It's about calculated sacrifice leveraging space and time to weaken the enemy, to make their advance their undoing.
So you're basically saying that sometimes the best way to defend your territory is to let the enemy have it.
In a way, yes. Think about the logistical challenges.
The further an army advances,
The more vulnerable their supply lines become.
add to that the potential for attrition, the impact on morale, even the changing seasons. These all become weapons in the defender's arsenal.
It's like the old saying, never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake.
Precisely. Clausewitz uses vivid historical examples to illustrate this. Think about fortresses drawing the enemy in.
Forcing lengthy sieges. These weren't just defensive structures, they were strategic traps, buying precious time and weakening the attacker's resolve. It's that waiting for strategy playing out on a grand scale.
This completely changes how I think about defense. But it requires a deep understanding of your adversary, your own strengths, and the terrain itself.
It's a high-stakes gamble.
Absolutely. But the payoff can be significant. Just look at Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia. He marched all the way to Moscow, but the sheer scale of the country, the harsh weather, and the constant harassment by Russian forces decimated his army. By the time he retreated, he was a shadow of his former self.
A stark reminder that victory on paper doesn't always translate to success on the ground.
Exactly. Clausewitz forces us to confront that sometimes the most effective form of defense might involve tactical retreats, calculated sacrifices.
And above all, strategic patience.
It's about choosing your battles, dictating the terms of engagement, and knowing when to hold back and when to strike.
And that's what makes Clausewitz so relevant even centuries later.
He reminds us that warfare is never as simple as it seems. There's always more to the story. And to truly master the art of war, you need to look beyond the immediate battle and understand the larger strategic context at play.
It's about understanding that sometimes the most effective defense might involve a strategic retreat or even a temporary loss, all with the goal of achieving a larger, more decisive victory.
Precisely. He challenges us to think differently.
To see the strength in strategic depth and calculated patience.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into Clausewitz's ideas on attack and defense. It's amazing how Prussian general writing in the 19th century can still offer so much insight for the modern military mind.
Absolutely. His work remains a timeless testament to the enduring principles of warfare and the strategic importance of defense in shaping the course of any conflict.
So if you're out there in the field facing a new challenge, remember Clausewitz's words. Defense is a stronger form of fighting than attack. Understanding his principles just might give you the edge you need, no matter the challenge you face. Until next time, keep strategizing.